Ready. Good evening. I would like to call to order the Keizer City Council in work session. It is Monday, November 9th, 2020, and ask our city recorder to please call roll.
Councilor Parsons.
She is excused this evening for family reasons.
Councilor Herrera.
Here.
Councilor Smith. Here. Mayor Clark.
Here.
Council President Freeman.
Here.
Councilor Reed.
Here.
And Councilor Kohler.
Here.
Thank you very much. So you have the agenda in front of you, Council, with your, pardon? It is a work session, but we can do the Pledge of Allegiance.
No, I just want to.
Yeah, it's not on. Traditionally, we've reserved that for the council meetings, but yeah, that's something that we can talk about adding. This evening, I would like to make a change to the agenda, though, because it is my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Benny Williams. Is it Dr. or Mr.? Mr. Okay. Benny Williams, the president of the Salem area NAACP, to join us in conversation tonight. I didn't have on the agenda in advance, but we have been conversing, and I thought it would be a really good opportunity to have a conversation about the statement, about what's going on in our community right here in a great setting like that. And then after that, we will go into one particular area regarding the desire of this council to add in an effective manner that is, but there's a lot of questions that we have on how we can do it regarding the repudiation of white supremacy specifically in this language. So those two are going to be specific adds, and then we will get into some of the other comments that we received from people on changes, additions, corrections, and so forth to the draft that went out in the packet. Council, are you good with those agenda changes or additions? All right. With that, Mr. Williams, we are very happy to have you here with us tonight. We appreciate the leadership that you have brought to our community for many years, and just an opportunity for us to talk about what's been happening in our community, how we can continue to build relationship, and understanding how we can use our language, our words, through this as well as future action to make sure that we are building community going forward. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, to everyone here tonight, I appreciate the opportunity of coming and being a part of the discussion. You know, to give you a little bit of background on myself, I'm the president of the Salem Keizer NAACP, and I'm delighted to be here because I'm not only familiar with Keizer, not only does the branch represent Salem, Keizer, and the surrounding Mid-Willamette Valley, but as importantly is that we're at a place in time where the discussion that's leading to us being here tonight is not only relevant, it's critical. And the critical nature of it is to understand that this year, 2020, has been a watershed year for events that literally are out of the control of any one of us sitting in this council room right now. But let me give you a little bit of background on myself, and then I can share with you some insights that not simply being part of the NAACP or even leading this branch, but is a reflection of life experiences that all of us have, but they all are different from one another. You know, I'm here in Salem. I'm sitting in Keizer right at the moment, but I'm in Salem by way of my wife being solicited out here, took Salem as a administrator, as an assistant principal and a principal in the Salem Keizer School District 20 years ago, literally. And the interesting aspect of this is that if it were not for that solicitation coming forward, Oregon was never in the farthest reaches of my mind, let alone Salem, let alone Keizer, let alone any other aspect of this state. So I tell you, on the basis of having been solicited, my wife had an opportunity. She was solicited both here and out of the city of Eugene, the school district, simultaneously. And I smile about this and I laugh as I share it. As these solicitations came out of the clear blue sky, it was an interesting thought that prevailed on both of us, and that was, as an educator, she's always interested in having a an opportunity of educating, of being involved in enlightening and moving forward the types of things that education in and of itself is a pivotal means of doing. She chose Salem Keizer because, given a choice between the two, she felt this community here was one in which she could have a greater impact. Just arbitrarily, it wasn't because she knew a lot more about Salem Keizer than she did about Eugene, but she decided after coming out here, both districts supported her being able to visit for a week, 3 weeks apart, and she came back and said, you know what, I think I want to do this. I said, do what? She says, I think I want to move and be part of the Salem Keizer School District. And I said, no. Those were vacations. Those just, and she came out here on her own, so it was a vacation for her, not for me. But she was determined. And as we talked about it and frankly reached an agreement that this was an opportunity that she did not want to pass up, I was supportive of it. Fast forward to where we are today. I sent a letter, if you will, to the mayor today, giving a perspective, a personal perspective of where we are as a people, as a community, as a state, as a nation. And one of the things I pointed out, and it's public record, I hope that it's able to be published. I can certainly read it tonight. But one of the things I would hope that comes out of that is what I like to remind people. I'm from Chicago, born and raised in Chicago. My wife, we raised our children there, and eventually we all moved out west. But I can tell you, growing up in Chicago and having my family, my extended family on my mother and father's side, coming from the South, Louisiana and Mississippi, respectively, I know firsthand racism, discrimination, and its pervasive means of having people feel not only disenfranchised, but simply inferior. Chicago, in and of itself, the history is that Chicago was thought of in any place north of the Mason-Dixon was considered progressive and not a place of racism and discrimination. But I can tell you, it existed in Chicago, and it existed in a way different than what was true in the South. But you know what? You can change the name, but the substance of the actions are the same. And I can tell you, based on that, particularly as we talk about law enforcement, which we'll get into at some point, I suspect, Chicago was notorious for having its law enforcement be less than considerate of the minority community. Let's back up a second. Remember, up until the last 20 years, the largest minority population in this country was African Americans, and we called ourselves black, and we still do, but it was black, African American, was the largest minority population in this country. In the last 20 years, we're now the second largest. The Latino community has more than doubled. And when I say doubled, at its height, the African American community, being the largest minority population, was about 13 million people. You've got almost twice that with the Latino community now across this country. But it does not matter whether you're black, Latino, Marshallese, or any of the other ethnicities that this community that we're sitting in, and broadly speaking of the Mid-Willamette Valley, discrimination is seen and felt by every one of us. And I remind people that where we sit today, there's a history that's contributing to that threat and that sense of threat that exists here. We're at a threshold where what this city council is working on right now can be pivotal in being a stepping stone toward the future. A future that is not going to get rid of black folks, it's not going to get rid of Latinos, it's not going to get rid of Marshallese, Pacific Islanders or Marshallese, or any of the other ethnic communities that exist here. What we would want to do, and I believe it really in the deepest stretches of our hearts and mind, is to understand that not only are we all the same in a real sense, but even if we have disagreements, we should not end up vilifying and marginalizing any one of us. Any one of us at any time, because we can sit here in this room and disagree. But the fact of the matter is, if progress is going to be made, we're going to have to understand that compromise and understanding has to be had. Because without that, chaos exists, and we know what chaos looks like. So let me back up and just say this. You know, my presence here tonight is not about anything other than saying that we have an opportunity to move forward. I've said on many occasions throughout my tenure as president and being a member of the NAACP for a very long time, Salem in particular and Keizer by extension have an opportunity of being the beacon on the hill. Look, Portland, our neighbor to the north, not more than 50 miles away from here, is by far larger than any other community in this state. And it does not entail or does not require the biggest to be the most progressive. It simply means that if we're going to be progressive, we have to understand progress is when we all come together. And when we come together, not only do we progress or see progress, we progress together. Nobody's left behind. We have that opportunity. We have that opportunity starting tonight as this body has been working toward coming up with a resolution to have everybody in this city recognize that we're all equal. We may continue to, in fact, we will continue to have differences, but we will not marginalize any one of us because there is no superiority among any of us. Even if we hold a title, we're still human and we're still residents of this community. That's what's important here tonight, and that's what's important as we go forward. When I open up my comments by saying this is a watershed year, look at all the things that's happened this year. George Floyd's death, who would have guessed that in their wildest dreams that it would have an impact not simply around Minneapolis and Minnesota, not simply across the Midwest, but across this nation and across the world. And that's not by accident because it touched all of us. Some of us know it more intimately than others, but it touched every last one of us. And that's given us this opportunity that allows us to be here tonight to understand we can't simply have recalled seeing that or having heard of it, but understand what contributed to it. Mm-hmm. And so as we have dialogue, as we have discussions, it really is about there is nothing that cannot be accomplished if we all collectively work toward it. And we're not going to get there tomorrow because we haven't gotten there for the last 200 years. But we can certainly show tonight and tomorrow that we're working toward understanding that we can do it. And I believe that we can. I've led this branch. I'm in the midst of an election for another term, but I've led this branch for 10 years, and I'm looking to lead it for an additional 2 years. Only because of all of the things that's happened this year gives us an opportunity that hasn't existed since the 60s. Since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led and was the face of the civil rights movement. So all of us, you know, one of his famous quotes is, any one of us can be great, but all of us can be great, but more importantly, all of us can serve. And I'm paraphrasing that because the more I think about it, I can quote a lot of his words because they're so applicable 50 years ago as they are today. And that's the significance of where we are today, is that we have the opportunity, we've made progress, now's the time for us to make greater progress. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and for your consistent leadership in our community for these many years, for 20 years, but more importantly for allowing it was setting the stage, I think, for the kind of conversation that is what I know I want, I know my fellow counselors want, I know the people in our community who are here, who have written to us, want to be able to do is find that path, find that space, find the words, and then the actions that go with it that make substantive progress, change, that sticks, that means something to everyone in the community, and that everybody has a part to play, that this isn't only a few people can be in the game. Everybody gets to be in the game, I think, if we're doing this right. So I appreciate your comments so much.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, you know, leadership brings us all forward. Now, you know, as we sit here in the city council chamber and we listen to the mayor and we've got elected city council people, they have to not simply be listeners, they have to also be motivators and true leaders in bringing about the things that you're working on. This resolution that's being worked on, and when I understand a little bit of the history of it, spanning more than a year or two, it's not that difficult. It's not that difficult because it really comes down to the commitment of understanding that we're going to have those that are going to disagree. But we have to show that if we're going to progress, if we're going to move forward, we've got to stand up and stand out and lead. You know, the wind changes and we can be a weather vane in the wind, but that doesn't get us anyplace. In fact, it moves us sideways and backwards more often than not. And so I want to encourage all of us here tonight, because it's not just the mayor, it's not just the city council people. It is their duty to not simply represent the people in their wards and in their districts, but it's also about the people in these districts and wards standing up and saying, listen, you know, enlighten me. Enlighten me. Don't simply pander to my misconceptions. Enlighten me to where we are and what we need to be doing. And I'll just back up again, or I'll just conclude for the moment by reminding us, when I say all of us have a history, every one of us individually, this city, this county, this state, this nation. And so when you break it down on an individual basis, Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the House, goes back 40 years or 50 years ago. One of his famous quotes, and I always hold on to it, is that all politics are local. If you get locally an understanding and some dialogue, you can move mountains, figuratively, not literally. But I would tell you, if you don't end up leading, you will never end up having the change that you're looking to have happened.
Thank you. Councilors, I'm going to open up for you, comments, questions. Councilor Herrera?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to thank Mr. Williams and thank you, Benny, for being here and for those wise words. And now that I'm at it, I want to make sure that you guys know that I am, it's been tough, but I just want folks to know, especially the councilors, that I respect all of you. And just because we have passionate discussions, my wife made me look at my video, so I just want you to know that I sometimes I'm a little too passionate. So I just want you guys to know that we're all in here to get this right. So, but thank you, Benny, and say hi to Dr. Richardson, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Good friends. So I appreciate those words. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilor Herrera. Councilor Reed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you again, Mr. Williams. I really appreciate your perspective and again for setting the tone for what we're trying to accomplish here. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've been thinking a lot about, based on our last council meeting and based on a lot of the written input, there's been a lot of talk of condemning and renouncing, and I've been cogitating on that for quite a while, and I also wanted to point out this part in the statement of values that says equity is both a process and an outcome. And I'm thinking from my perspective, when a student feels condemned for ignorance the learning stops at that point. And nothing happens except perhaps resentment towards those who are trying to teach. And that is rarely productive. And so I really liked Mr. Williams' phrase, enlighten me. You know, we need to be able to set a situation where people want to be enlightened and not be condemned for their ignorance. And I think that that is where we can have a little bit more productive conversation. And while I'm certainly in agreement that there is no room for hate or any kind of feelings of superiority in any of these discussions, I think that we need to be able to focus on the enlightenment and the productive conversations. So, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, especially with Mr. And I want to open up to city staff as well. I think many of you have worked with Mr. Williams before. I know, Chief, you have on a number of occasions, and you've, I remember particularly the Bridging the Gap event that was here a few years ago, and some of the fabulous conversations that happened there. And I believe that video is still available. If not, we'll make sure it's back up on our website and the KeizerTV.com. It was a panel of Black leaders. Well, actually, it was Black, wasn't Latino, some other, and I think Marshallese.
And the church community.
Right, and the church community, and then our law enforcement community as well. It was a really good conversation. And I really appreciated being able to have that conversation. But it didn't end there, did it? There's been ongoing conversations and communication. Can you share a little bit, just to give the community a sense of the kind of work and communication that has happened with our public safety and the NAACP to build relationship?
I'll let Benny speak to that, but I will say this. It's not lost on me that the day after I'm retired, nobody will remember my name. While I'm here, I'm taking advantage of opportunities to spend precious moments with people like Mr. Williams. We've had just great, rewarding conversations over the years, over meals and over handshakes in the hallway. And it's only been very rewarding to me. And I say that to say this. Benny Williams is one of the most gracious men I know. Even in the midst of heated conversations, he is always a leveling influence. And he would rather get there tomorrow with grace than crash through the door today. And that, I think, is a large part of how we move forward. We're clearly in the threshold today and need to move. I'm not suggesting we don't. I'm simply commenting on your graciousness. I'm better for having spent time with you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You know, I'll use this as a basis for saying, you know, one of the things I'm proud of when we talk about law enforcement and all of the negative connotations and images that many of us conjure up when it comes to law enforcement, one of the keen and very purposeful steps that we've taken as a branch of the NAACP here is having dialogue with our law enforcement community. This is one of the few areas I can think, not only in the state but in general, that between Salem and Keizer, there's 5 law enforcement agencies that exist. The City of Salem Police Department, the City of Keizer Police Department, Polk County Sheriff, Marion County Sheriff, and the State Police, Oregon State Police. We've reached out over the years, and I believe successfully we've been able to, as a result of having communications with every one of these departments, we've, for the most part, you know, and I don't believe in knocking on wood because I believe my sense of belief is higher than simply knocking on wood. But I would tell you this, I think because we continue to have a good dialogue, and John just alluded to it, we've been spared some of the blatant situations of law enforcement that we've seen around the country. And we've seen it just to the north of us here. Use of deadly force, overuse of force when it comes to addressing people of color in particular is commonplace. And that's an unfortunate statement to make, but it's a fact. It's commonplace across the country. Post George Floyd, how many more deaths have we seen at the hands of police? Again, with unarmed, and continue in several occasions, restrained individuals being shot and killed. That's a fact. I'm not exaggerating it. We're in a world where there's, at our fingertips, there's so much more information than we've ever had in the history of the world. And yet we're just as backwards to some extent when it comes to understanding that these are human elements and they can be controlled. They can't, look, legislation keeps a man from killing me, but it's the heart and the mind that has to be changed to understand that we don't have to get to that place where life is on the line because we disagree. I remind people often, John just mentioned it, in the heat of battle, we can have just that. We can be truly focused on our beliefs. The fact of the matter is, unless there's compromise, unless there's some sense of respect, we will end up always being entrenched on opposite sides of the issue that needs to be addressed. And you don't make progress. No progress is made as long as we're fighting over what the issue is, but not understanding the remedy to resolving that issue. And today we have, you see the initials BLM, and people now truly understand what BLM is, Black Lives Matter, but people don't quite understand that it's a twofold, it has a twofold meaning. There literally is a Black Lives Matter organization. But Black Lives Matter, when you see the signs in the yards and you see them on the back of cars or you see them anywhere and across t-shirts, it's a rallying cry to say, listen, Black Lives Matter because we've seen Black lives taken at the drop of a hat for no reason at all. And that is not true for any other part of our population. Mm-hmm. And it's been historical. It hasn't been just in the last 10 years or since April of this year when George Floyd was killed. The NAACP came into existence, by the way, more than 111 years ago with a singular purpose that's been expanded ever since it came into existence. The singular purpose was to stop lynching of Black people across the South. From that beginning to where we are today, it's incorporated not simply Black people having rights and having lives that matter, but having all of us understand that we all have the civil rights that the Constitution provides. I can continue on, but when I mention about Black Lives Matter, understand there was a time before Black Lives Matter became a rallying cry. The rallying cry was, "We shall overcome." You all remember that? Mm-hmm. That goes back a few years ago. And in between there was, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." These are rallying cries, not simply of our community, but recognition being expressed to the rest of our society that not only do we simply exist, but there is a desire to understand that there is no reason why we can't be respected just as the rest of society is respected and have access to all the things that the rest of society has access to. I mentioned about the NAACP coming into existence to address literally lynching, but it also from then to now continues to work toward all of us having access to education, to housing, to health care, to voting rights. All of these things matter. And they can all be taken away if we simply get entrenched in opposing what is literally written out in writing, it's visual, in the Constitution, that all men are created equal. But I want to just say this, and I'll, again, move on. Some things require debate. Some things require enlightenment. Other things require just having a decent understanding of right and wrong.
Thank you. It's a lot to take in and process and think about, and I'm very happy this is on video, so we will have the opportunity to go back and revisit this as well. One of the things that we have heard loudly, and that every single one of us desires to do, is to find a way in which we can specifically address the belief system of white supremacy. Many people want us to find a way to express this in this value statement. We went looking, and I know that Councillor Smith in particular dug deeply into other cities and counties and organizations' statements and did not find a specific reference in there to, you found one. Okay, you found one. Which one was it? While you look it up. Which surprised me a little bit, but then it did not, because belief systems, religions, philosophies, and so forth are protected under, and I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but all of us repudiate the idea that any race, the white race or any race, would be ever considered inferior, that there'd be an inferior, superior construct in how we do life, and yet is deeply embedded in so much of how our state evolved, practices within our cities, counties, and indeed historically, as you talked about with the lynchings, that were accepted as an okay way to do law enforcement. In making a statement that repudiates the belief system and the practices of white supremacy, can you tell me how that feels, how that is received? And I know this is something I want to say. What do you say in return? That's a great idea. It doesn't matter. It matters a lot. I'm looking for feedback, I guess.
Yeah, I would remind all of us, we can look at what has been true. We can also be cognizant of what can be true. So as much as there's not been may not have been a literal statement of a denouncing of white supremacy in the mission of any municipality or any city or community, that doesn't mean it cannot happen. It does not mean that we cannot be the first to uphold more clearly than anyone else has been able to do our values. We don't always have to be followers, because that indeed is the opposite of leading. I'm not here to criticize white supremacists and Proud Boys by name or anybody else. What I am saying is, if we're going to be leaders and understand that and the whole effort here is to have everybody in this community feel safe and understand that its leadership is promoting safety and awareness and understanding and compassion and dialogue. What's wrong with putting in place, in writing, exactly how we get there? By removing and by dismissing those that believe otherwise, as a result of white supremacy and racism and discriminatory steps and actions that they may take. We're not going to get rid of anything by simply putting in writing, but we can certainly make visible what we stand for and then collectively stand behind it. Because the minute we start feeling timid about being honest about what we would like to have happen, nothing will happen. I mean, we've got the history to show that that's true. let me give you, it's not an anecdote as is a factual reflection of what was true when I came here. Because I had never thought in the farthest reaches of my mind about Oregon. When we got here, the assumption was, okay, but it took a little family meeting, and when I say family, it's my wife and I, and she, by having been out here a month earlier and met with some folks, we had a look, it wasn't even dinner, it was a get-together. And because I was traveling back and forth, and that's another story, but I'll just tell you that it was a shock to the system when I was able to sit with folks, residents of this community, and was told literally, the question was asked to me because I was just feeling comfortable. I'm from Chicago. 30% of the Chicago was African American. So I came here thinking that, okay, I know it's not a lot of us, but I know we're here. And it took a conversation that went something like this. One of the persons said, so, I know you're from Chicago, but this is a kind of a shock, should be, or maybe a shock to the system to know how few of African Americans are here. And I said, why do you say that? He said, well, how many African Americans do you think are here in Salem? I said, what, 15, 17%? Try again. 10%? Oh, no, I'm gonna give you one more try. What, 6 or 7? How about 1? I said, pardon me? I knew what the population was here, 150, 160,000 people. When he said 1%, I said, really? I said, okay, so that means that Portland has a lot more. He said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, what, Portland's got to have, what, 15, 20%? No, try again. So we're going through this, and it got to a point where I said, I'm not trying anymore. Just tell me. He says, about 6%. So look, the fact of the matter is, 20 years later, those figures haven't changed. They have not substantially changed. What has changed is a new listing that, again, this is a reflection of quote unquote progress and simply dicing up the pie so that rather than clarity, you get more confusion. And I want to be frank here tonight. Up until 10 years ago, you were African American, you were Latino, you were white, and that was about it. But then into the census count came mixed race. And so now when you include mixed race into the equation, you actually have that same 1% and 6% respectively out of Salem and Portland. You've got another 4 or 5% number that's included in it. Because again, we live in a society that, look, you can call yourself mixed race, and being mixed race, you can call yourself white, you can call yourself black, but the society says that if you're mixed race and you're black, you're black. Okay? Now look, I'm not here to give you a civics lessons and or a history lesson. What I'm trying to tell you is that all of us know, if we really want to know, what the reality is. And so the reality is this, and this goes back to what the mayor just asked, about language. You don't have to be timid about wanting to be progressive. You don't have to be worried about, you're always going to have, Chief Teague knows I use this word specifically. Those that don't want to know or don't want to be progressive or don't want to change, I call them knuckleheads. And you're always going to have knuckleheads. Always. And so you don't worry about that. You worry about, so what can I do as a collective body to show that we're of the same mind and we reflect the community in that we want to move forward. And so I would ask you not to be timid about the language, because those that don't want to accept it and believe it and live by it won't. But there's too many of us, the vast majority, who understand that, listen, if we're going to live together, grow together, and prosper, we have to come together and stand behind and stand up for each other.
Thank you. That very eloquently answered my question. I appreciate that. I know all of us have spent a great deal of time and thinking, reading, talking with people, and reflecting upon what we've been seeing, experiencing, and our neighbors talking to us about their experiences as well. And I think I have heard from every single city councilor that there's a strong desire to move forward with a way in which we add a repudiation of white supremacy and, quite frankly, any philosophy framework, I'm struggling for words, in which one race, one group is deemed and treated as superior to another, but that we can make it a priority that every human being, every person in this community is treated with the dignity, respect, as you said, all people created equal. We just know that the practices have not created that equal playing field, and that is something that we're going to have the opportunity to move forward with. Just as a spoiler alert, our next work session is going to be about housing equity. So hang on for that one, because entree into home ownership, we know, is a key component of family stability and shared prosperity for all people. And we know that there have been systems put into place that are still difficult to navigate, especially for our families of color in Oregon. I'm going to I asked Councilor Smith for an answer to the question. I'll go to you, Councilor Herrera, and I'll come around. Councilor Smith, you found who had that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It was Beaverton, and please mind, I read through 14 of these different cities. I've been Googling it. I've been looking up from here to California to just how are people doing things? What are other people doing? Not because I couldn't take the time to figure it out, but honestly, it's one of those things where if someone's good at it, why reinvent the wheel? Find somebody who has the premise figured out. So Beaverton did have a portion of theirs said, whereas elected officials of the city of Beaverton join area leaders in condemning white supremacy, racism, and violence in the wake of recent local and national tragedies, and affirming that we can and will build communities that shun hate, offer equitable opportunity, and see our differences as cause for celebration, not division. And I love that. I think it's perfectly worded. And again, we're kind of on a little bit of a time crunch with getting something out there. we have 50% of the people are emailing saying, you need to pass something right now. And the other 50% are saying, you need to slow down and put some thought into it. So again, I know that this is a rough draft per se, and I know we've discussed going forward that this could be something that could be open to revisions and things as we find other additional language we want to add in there that is more Keizer driven, or however that is. My personal opinion is that has to come from the community. It can't just be from us. I would love to see, at the beginning of the year, and I've mentioned it a couple times, that there's other additional cities out there that have already done this, but they have created a committee. The Human Relations Committee is one that I am aware of in Albany, where each counselor appoints someone to that committee so that they can actively get us connected to the community. One of the things I heard loud and clear was, you're not out there. And I'm like, I'd be wherever you asked me to go, but I don't know. So if there's a way to open that door between us, which, I get it. I'd never come into city council before until I actually decided to run. And it's not something I would have been jumping up and down going, on Monday night, I'm going to go down there and do that. So props to everybody who is. So I was just as disengaged as the rest of the community. So if we're going to get people involved in the conversation, it can't just be us. It can't be, because there's that block there. Nobody wants to come down to City Hall. The police are right there. Whatever that mentality set may be, we need to get that door opened. So a committee of citizens who could say, hey, by the way, and I was speaking with Councilor Herrera about this, if there's an event, if there's some kind of cool celebration, whether it be, I think right now is Native American History Month, there's different things that are out there that if I know, I would be there. But I need an advocate because, believe it or not, I do have a full-time job. And I've got a house that burned down in Detroit. So I have a few other things on my plate. So I need help. And I would just say that if we can get something pulled out of one of these current ones that just adds in the fact that we're not going to be discriminatory and we're not going to tolerate white supremacy, which I personally find disgusting, by the way. I have zero tolerance for it. But if we can add that in and get this passed, so we can now have some kind of framework to move forward from, and that we can continue to have the dialogue, I think that that would be a good investment into our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Herrera.
I just want to add, well, Benny reminded me of something when he talked about a month ago, Homeland Security Director Chad Wolf and Christopher Wray, who heads FBI, they had a news conference, and that's where I picked up. I'm the one that brought that up about condemning white supremacy. And the focus of that particular news conference naturally was domestic terrorism. And they said that the number one, they pretty much said the number one domestic terrorism problem is white supremacy. They didn't say groups like white supremacy, hate group, they said white supremacy. That's what they mentioned, they said it. And it struck me that it was a national conference and news conference, and that's, to me, that says it all. Like I said, they said white supremacy is the number one cause of domestic terrorism, and that's, they didn't say, like I said, they didn't say any other groups, they didn't say people like that, they said white supremacy, and I really believe that. So I do not think it's beyond being a person of color myself, and it's just me, it's just my opinion. I don't think it's beyond the pale to mention that in our statement, and I like what you used to say, Kathy, Mayor Clark, about just, Keizer does its own thing. We don't follow what Salem or other cities do, and I don't think it would be out of line to add something like that. And I've talked to a lot of folks of color in the community, and my constituents, like Councilor Kohler says, and they have had experiences that would, they can relate to what I'm saying. And I respect everybody's opinions, and that's just my own opinion, and that's why I brought it up, because I'm guilty of bringing it up. And like I say, I don't think we have to wait for somebody, and I understand the part about reinventing the wheel, I get that. But I believe, like Mr. Williams said about leading, and what's wrong with being the first in our valley to actually denounce white supremacy. And that's the way I feel. I just, like I say, I listen to anybody, but that's just my own personal observation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So at this point of the conversation, first of all, Mr. Williams, thank you. I really appreciate you taking time to be with us tonight, and I hope that we will continue to have some great conversations. Thank you, by the way, for hosting the community conversations on Zoom. I've been able to be on 3 of those, and they've been very wide-ranging. And I'm hoping that as those continue to occur, that we can continue to delve into questions, issues, people's experiences, and be able to share those in, I hope, a constructive way.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Absolutely look forward to you continuing to be involved. And I invite all of us here, the efforts that we're making as a branch to reaching out to law enforcement and having town hall meetings, the dialogue that we've had and continue to have directly with the Salem-Keizer School District, these are 2 of the core issues of how do we move forward and make sure we're all moving forward together. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So the second thing that we talked about bringing up, we've already been talking about that, is adding into this statement a repudiation of white supremacy specifically as a system, and also as a basis for policies, practices, laws, anything else that happens within the jurisdiction of this city. I like that language. Councilor Smith, would you get that to the city attorney? Because what I would like to do with the consent of council is to each of us let our city attorney know what we are thinking about, and then leave it to him to make, kind of put together the piece that can go in here that would be, capture that essence for us, rather than try to wordsmith it tonight, because I think we might be here a while, and I don't think that beating around one or two words is going to change the intent of this council. I know we can't take a vote tonight. I know we can't, take action specifically, but we're preparing for this statement of values to be able to come to city council. So with that, I'd like your thoughts on the statement that you heard, and then the desire of this council to use this statement to lead the way in affirming, as was eloquently put tonight, compromise, understanding, the progress together, equality so that no one is marginalized, and that belief systems, systems in general, we've been hearing in I hate acronyms. It was the racial equity and leadership from the National League of Cities in the video that we saw, talking about that brain just left my head. Talking about putting into words, normalizing, and having the conversation about that the people in our community, that we can make a statement and then take action for true equality and equity in Keizer. I'm going to stop there because I'll probably say something and end up going upside down and backwards, and then somebody will say, "You said what?" All right. All right. Thoughts on that we want to make sure we include regarding the denunciation of white supremacy in this statement. Councilor Smith.
Sorry, I have another example. The other one is the resolution in Philomath, and it says, we condemn racism and those who display racism, discrimination, intolerance, bigotry, and hostility, and does not tolerate expressions of acts of hostility, intimidation, or harassment, and instead is committed to the elimination of all forms of racism everywhere it exists, and denounces violence against people of color, and affirms the principle that all Black lives matter. So there's an additional one. The question I had was, do you call out white supremacy specifically, and other ones just do a more generalized term? That's why I was looking at these different ones. So I think that would be something that obviously we would want to format an opinion so that Shannon could then the city attorney can then make a decision on that. But that is something that I did notice. Some are very, very straightforward, and some are a little bit more generalized. So I think we just want to see how we want to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor Herrera.
Madam Mayor, may I ask Mr. Williams a question?
Of course.
Mr. Williams, I'd like to see what your thoughts on this are. You mentioned the Black Lives Matter, and some communities, for some reason, they still affiliate Black Lives Matter with fascism, and they always say that. They don't understand what. Could you explain to the folks? Because there's folks in this room that will not, really. I mean, they don't understand what Black Lives Matter, what it means.
So
and they say it's fascism, and they keep saying, how would you explain that to a community?
I explained it that I look around here and there's only a few of us that that are millennials. The rest of us know clearly what the civil rights movement of the 60s was all about. It was about not simply marching, but marching with a chant, to have it understood that rhythmically, if you will, that here's why we're here. Here's why we're here, that meaning those marches and those demonstrations. Because we shall overcome. Overcome what? Anybody that asks the question, overcome what? The answer can then be laid out exactly what it is that we're talking about overcoming. Black Lives Matter is a reflection of that today. It's a reflection of the loss of life at an exceptionally unacceptable level of lives being lost that is not equal nor relative to any other part of our society. These cell phones that has captured these videos over the last 10 years is simply visualizing what has always been true. And And as long as it's always been true and it was never seen, the debate could always be had, well, that's an exaggeration and that, it doesn't happen that often. Look, I just said, since George Floyd, literally more than 2 handful of deaths by the hands of law enforcement. Again, we're not talking about where they're confronted with return fire. We're talking about unarmed, oftentimes restrained individuals have lost their lives. And I've yet to see one of them being white, very frankly. Because what happens, no differently with that shooter in Kenosha, Wisconsin, he can walk around with a rifle in front of police. Police can walk right on past him. Here he has already killed 2 people and wounded another, and they roll right by him. Why? Because he was white. You know, you can draw other conclusions, but I'm going to tell you, there's no argument about that because we've seen it. We collectively, we've seen it. So here's a situation where this whole, and it's back to Councilman Herrera's question about how do you explain and how do you have people understand why Black Lives as a slogan, why it has significance. Because it's reflective of what is going on, not just post George Floyd, but prior to George Floyd. You know, we really can go back to Rodney King in 1991 and see the beginning of a continuing collection of video capturing African-American men and women being, again, let's think in terms of what kind of percentage we have. Nationally, 13%. And yet, in our jails and in loss of life, it's at an extraordinarily higher number than what is true of the general population, that Black people are losing their lives, being incarcerated, and on and on and on. Again, back to Councilman Herrera. So Black Lives Matter is really to try to be as clear and simple a statement of what it is that has been not understood, and that is that Black Lives Matter. It's not designed to antagonize, it's designed to enlighten all of us. If you ask the question, why do Black Lives Matter? Because too often they've been taken unnecessarily. And not simply incarcerated, but the complete loss of life. And so I hope I'm addressing your question, Councilman Herrera, is Black Lives Matter is not the same, does not stand for the same thing as, by name, white supremacists, and any of the other ilk that falls into that category. It just does not. There is no same thing, it's the same thing, and they're all part of the same group, and they're all part of the same cabal. That is not true. And the citizens of this community, no differently than the elected leaders here, it's not a matter of deep in your heart understanding this. It's just being rationally sane in asking the question, are we seeing literally this set of circumstances that is peculiar to a certain people and is not reflective of the rest of our community? And I tell you that that's all you have to do. The data, you know, we're more and more prone and driven to, so give me the data. It's there. So then with the data, there's still the argument. Well, let's think about it. The data says this, but that science is science. You know, the whole idea, I smile about this. The scientific method is what has us having reached the moon, reaching Mars, and yet here on Earth, we sit in this room and we want to debate whether Black folks are killed at a higher rate than white folks. It isn't debatable. It's how do you deal with it, and what do we need to do to deal with it?
Right.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So what I'd like council to do is give direction to city attorney. We've heard two really good examples of the statement from Beaverton, the statement from Philomath regarding racism and white supremacy, specifically as a belief system, and then as the foundation of policies and practices. Is there anything else that you would like him to take into consideration as he tries to craft from this very in-depth conversation a segment to go into this values statement? And you don't have to answer right now because there's a lot to think about. And if there's something that does come to mind, this would probably be a couple of iterations as this language gets put together. I'm not going to put it all on Mr. Johnson because that's an awful lot to ask. And this is collectively a really good conversation about what should be included in that statement. But I think it's very clear that it's a repudiation of white supremacy as a belief system, as a practical matter for how our city shall operate. I think it's very clear that it is our intention that the Black members of our community have the same opportunities and the same consideration as every other member in our community. Councilor Reed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is indeed an essentially important ideal, and I think that as a result, we do need to be able to express this in the best way possible. And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me in that Beaverton one is it was the phrase based on recent events. And I want to think, I would think that, when we include something like this in ours, that it would not be just a reaction, but more of a sort of ongoing, I'm going to say battle, but ongoing progression, I guess would be a better word. Yeah. So that would be something that I would look into is, and we already have in here that it's a result of history, and that acknowledgement I think is very important. But to make sure that this is not just seen as a reactionary measure, but that it is an ongoing progression.
So sorry, microphone. And I absolutely agree with your point because I really felt that as well, that it was by referencing just one event, we're not paying attention to the long history of practices. I mean, the fact that the NAACP had to form in order to stop the lynching of Black people in this country speaks to the long standing discrimination that has existed in our country. So I like that we have in here that it's historically resulted in discrimination, disparity, and we could actually end violence that we have observed, that we know has happened. Oregon in particular with the sundown laws, which were, when I think I've said this before, this is not my native state, and I was not aware of that until very recently when I began to learn more about the history of this state. I really didn't know. But I do remember when I got to Corvallis, when I was hired at Oregon State, and kind of wondering where everybody was. It just seemed odd to me, but I really couldn't put a finger on it. It didn't make sense to me. And then students came back, and of course you get a mix from across the nation. Among the student population, but it struck me as odd when I got to Corvallis, and I just didn't know why that was pretty much a monochromatic community, which is something I wasn't used to. Councilor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just as a note, that Beaverton one was written in 2018.
Interesting.
Speaks volumes.
Yeah, it does. Is everybody good with that? I did make that one add, adding City of Keizer practices, policies, laws, and regulations have historically resulted in discrimination and disparity.
So, did you mean discrimination, comma, disparity, comma, and violence? Did you say you wanted to add that part in?
Council? Yes, no, maybe so? And I remember somebody, I think it was Carol, asked for this to be up on the screen, so thank you, that was a really good idea. And thank you for your patience while I try to do both of these at the same time. Thoughts?
Okay, this is
Okay.
the English teacher in me. I would probably say disparity, discrimination, and violence.
Okay.
Just as kind of a progression.
I understand that.
Comma.
Oxford, comma, or no?
I vote
saw it.
yes.
I saw that going through your head. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, is whether or not to put that comma there or not. You have the Oxford comma and the not, and I had it beat into me by my English teachers in high school because I'm of that age of time period where you put the Oxford comma in, so. Anyway,
As long as it legally doesn't make a difference, and as long as we're consistent, that is
Okay.
the key.
all right. Don't mean to make light, but actually, there have been cases that have been argued over a comma. Make no mistake, it can happen. I don't want that to get in the way of us actually getting it right. All right. So we've got two directions. One is to add within the background. There has been talk about including the Oxford Merriam-Webster dictionary. Anyway, the dictionary definition, I don't remember which one it came from, of white supremacy, to just make sure we're clear about what we're talking about. In this upper section here, thoughts about adding that as a part of the background. That's what the whereases are for, is the background. This is the arguments leading up to the conclusion of now therefore. And since it's not a conclusion, this is the background of what we're talking about. Do we want to add that definition in here, or do we want to refer to it in the latter part by reference? Thoughts? And do you want me to refresh memory on what that says? We do have that. Thanks to Ms. Clendenning, we have that exactly. Okay, according to, and I'd have to go back and double check this. According to Merriam-Webster, white supremacy is, quote, the belief that white race is inherently superior to other races and that white people should have control over people of other races. Now, I don't know if this is also part of the definition or not, so we'd have to go back and look, because my bad, I didn't. White supremacy is the social, economic, and political systems that collectively enable white people to maintain power over people of other races.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Why are we trying to, I'm sorry, this may sound crazy, but why are we trying to define it? I mean, we can't just say like white supremacy, or do we have to back it up with some kind of a?
It helps to set the framework so everybody knows what we're talking about. Because for some people, maybe it's a belief system, or people don't know the extent of it. It helps to define our terms when we have, and it also promotes communication and clarity. The conversation we just had about Black Lives Matter. Many of us are aware of the organization. Others are aware of the rallying cry, the statement, and there was a distinction that Mr. Williams made. It helped define what we're talking about. And I think that by including the definition, we help clarify what we are talking about. So other people, because when you see a term, if it's not defined, then each person comes with their own definition.
Well, white supremacy is, the two words right there pretty much say it all, and Black Lives Matter doesn't even compare to that, but I mean, supreme, white, I mean, that tells you what white supremacy is, that they're superior. So I don't understand why we should add a definition for it. Everybody knows what white supremacy is, I think, and I don't mean anything against Council Reed's position on that, but I don't understand how just denouncing white supremacy, why we have to have this definition. Am I wrong, or that's just my own opinion? I was wondering why you would have to put a definition to white supremacy.
We heard from a number of people, especially in the information we got from folks who shared their statements, that a definition was definitely included, and it was very helpful to bring focus on exactly what we're talking about, so it would be less open into interpretation or not understanding. If someone hasn't experienced that, doesn't have a background or has not been in a place where they've experienced that, that belief system, it helps to define it. And it also helps bring it, as Mr. Williams said, bring it out in the open. Let's say what it is. Let's use the words to specify what exactly we're talking about, rather than leave it to, I think it's this, I think it's that. If we make that statement about what white supremacy is as a belief system and as a foundation from which organizations, governments, and agencies have operated from, then we can say this is specifically what we are saying is what we do not believe in, do not support. So, in my opinion, and again, this is up to council, but also we heard loud and clear from the community that a definition would be very helpful. And that's, I would support putting in the definition, just to make sure we all know what we're talking about.
And Madam Mayor, you mentioned the letters. I really am thankful for all the folks that wrote the letters. I mean, that was really good input from the community. In particular, I would like for you to read, if you can, the letter from the former interim city manager from Keizer, John Morgan. I'd like for you to read that so folks can understand what a former city manager, interim city manager, what's his take on this. It'd be nice to share it with the community if possible, Madam Mayor.
Oh, yes, I know which one you're talking about. I had a chance to read it.
We just got it today, so.
Yes, that was among, 7 o'clock.
It rang home because of John used to work here, and
Right.
John Morgan, and folks know him, and he was actually the community development person here, and I really appreciate his thoughts, so thank you very much for reading it. I appreciate that.
Yes, I will in a moment. And he did share some really good history that predated some of us or who are in this community, so we would not be aware of the events that took place in Keizer in the 90s and 80s. So it was helpful, refresher for those who may have forgotten or were not here at that time. So not all of us were here in the 90s. I know it predates Mr. Epley. He was not a city manager at that time under the very colorful administration of a certain police chief that I remember. Council President Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Why don't you pull your microphone a little closer?
I would support having a definition in there, and the reason is we've defined other terms in this resolution as well, as far as, a federal definition of race, color, religion, national origin, excuse me, sex, on and on. We have a state definition as well. I just really believe the more that we can clarify what we are after, that it helps our community know where we are as a council and a city, because we all have different interpretations, we all have different meanings of different words, and I just think the more that we can be clear, I'm hoping that that communicates clearly to our citizens. But I think this is our start, and I just constantly think that this is something that we will have to continue to look at. Maybe it's something we look at on an annual basis. I'm not sure what the council will decide going forward, but I just think that the more that we can be clear, because some of these terms are new to people, and this work is new to people, and some people in this room may say, I've been doing this work for a really long time, but for some, government, this is new conversation in a lot of governmental entities. I work at Oregon Housing Community Services. We have a statewide housing plan. we have one of our core values, equity, racial justice, and we're still working on defining on, sometimes what that means. In homeownership, it's what we do every day, but we've had to get there, right? It takes a lot of education and making sure people really understand what your end result is, but really understanding the words we use. And I just think that if we need to be clearer, then that's going to help us, just further this work. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Other thoughts? So I've added in a placeholder here for the belief system of white supremacy is defined as, and we will get that terminology clarified so we all know what we're talking about. I'm seeing some head nods in the audience going, yes, this is a helpful thing. And then I got that loud and clear from a lot of people who took the time to send in their comments. After our last council meeting, I asked people to send their written comments in, and you did. Thank you. It's really helped to have that time to read them through, and again, more thought into our conversation tonight. Okay. So I'm going to add something here. I don't know if it's Keizer City Council or City of Keizer. Our city attorney will direct me on that to make sure that we don't get it wrong, so. Can't type when people are watching. And I like what Councilor Smith, what you read from Philomath regarding the racial. Would you?
Yes, it is condemns racism and those who display racism.
Hang on, slow down.
Oh, you're typing it, okay.
I'm good, but not that good.
Oh, come on, you can go faster.
Keep going.
Okay, those who display racism, discrimination, intolerance, bigotry, and hostility.
Okay, I'm not going to, et cetera. Okay.
Okay, and does not tolerate expressions or acts of hostility, intimidation, or harassment, and instead is committed to the elimination of all forms of racism everywhere it exists.
Elimination of all forms of racism.
All forms of racism everywhere it exists. And denounces violence against people of color.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I'm sorry, which one was that example from?
Philomath.
That's the city of Philomath.
Philomath.
Philomath? In what section was that?
It's on there, it's resolution 20-11. It is in the very first page, and it's the numbers 3 through 6.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put the reference in there just for, again, I didn't get it word for word. We're not wordsmithing tonight,
Yeah.
we're concept smithing.
Feels like the Charter Review Committee all over again.
Madam Mayor?
Flashback.
Madam Mayor?
Yes,
I would recommend putting that paragraph before the other one, because the now therefore paragraph specifies the welcoming every person regardless of, and talking about that. And then this is very specific to race, which is important because it is the most probably prolific of problems with this, I'm going to say discrimination, obviously, there's a lot more involved here. And then it ends with the affirms of the commitment to ensure that all members. So again, I think this is an important piece to call out, the racism piece of this. And I do like that this encompasses all communities that have traditionally experienced discrimination and the violence and the disparity and all of those other things. But I just feel like that would be a more appropriate place for
Did I
it.
get that right, or did I get?
Yep. That's what I think. Anybody
Okay, now,
else have any?
Is the order that I just flipped the paragraphs, did I get it right, or should this one be our conclusion? That, at that, as the conclusion, we commit to continuing to take action to be a city that welcomes every person. And I'm going to take issue with the word regardless. I had a wonderful conversation with our city manager about the word regardless. And I had the opportunity to be in the diversity and equity workshops last week that was offered to the employees of the state of Oregon. And one of the speakers had a very profound statement about regardless. He goes, why would you not regard my identities? The things about me that make me unique. Why would it be I don't want to regard your race, your gender, your age, your ability, disability. I'm going to look at you, but I'm not going to have regard for, rather than that we do regard all of that, all of the elements of a person's identity, our individuality, the strengths of who we are, and that all those identities play into the uniqueness of each human being. Why would it be regard less? And why not that we welcome and embrace that individuality of who each of us is, where, we've had a different education, we've had different family structures and experiences, we've come from different socioeconomic experiences, on and on, but that all plays into our identity. And I think it was important to not be regardless, but mindful of. Would that be okay?
And embrace. What were you? I'm sorry. What were
This
you?
word right here.
Yes. So what were you suggesting instead of that?
I haven't wordsmithed it to be grammatically correct, but we want to welcome every person in all aspects of their race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, disability, source of income. That all of those things play into making each of us an individual, who we are. And isn't that who we want to embrace, as each one of us as a unique human being? And all of these different parts of our identity are important. I don't want to disregard. I remember having a wonderful conversation with my supervisor when I had the opportunity to work with the Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we talked about, what does this mean in terms of, I don't see color. And she goes, why? Well, that's my way of saying that I am not distinguishing you and me based on our skin color. She goes, no, that's part of my identity. My skin color, my hair color, or the lack thereof now, is all part of the identity that makes me a unique individual. And you can put 10 people in the room that are the same age, the same gender identity, the same familial status, and they're still going to have differences. Heck, my husband's an identical twin, and he and his twin brother are unique. They're different. So I think that instead of regardless, let's embrace those wonderful things about each and every one of us that make us unique and special. So this is something that the speaker just totally resonated, can you tell? When he talked about, let's take out the regardless and let's celebrate this. Let's celebrate the uniqueness of every person. So there's got to be a word that goes in there better than regardless. Mr. Epley.
Well, you've hit on it 5 or 6 times. Just eliminate regardless of and insert embracing. You got to get rid of the of also, but yeah. Ta-da.
Ta-da. He was much briefer than I was. Thank you. Is everybody okay with that change?
Madam Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I believe the city manager's suggestion makes sense, and especially if you add the word every after embracing.
Instead of there, because that's an us, that's not an inclusive, that's an othering, embracing. Okay,
The grammar may need a little work.
that's okay. We have people who can do that. The thought's there. Yes? Okay. All right. I think we've made progress. What I'd like to do now is, we've got a framework that I'm going to ask, as we have further thoughts, and I haven't forgotten your request, Councilor Herrera, about Mr. Morgan's email this morning. I think it told a very important story that many of us who were not here back in the 90s don't know. Yeah. And it's kind of like what I discovered about the state and the sundown laws. I did not know about that when I moved here either. So it's important to know some of the history. We've heard a few people allude to the perception of Keizer as a community, but that the cops would pull people over and so forth and so on and harass. And I'm going, you don't do that. I'm looking at Chief Teague. It's like, that doesn't happen here now. But back in the 90s, that was the reputation of this city. And it definitely predates our chief. It predates the vast majority of, I believe, of our police staff at this point. We have a much younger staff now, as I've seen our new police officers come through who are very interested, as you talked about, Chief, in justice and exoneration, rather than seeing if they can make a quota of tickets. That word doesn't even exist in our budgeting. Right, Mr. Wood? No, not even. But there are communities where that has happened, and this is a community that did have problems in the past. So I think it's important for us to recognize our history. So I'm going to go ahead and read that unless somebody, okay. Be patient with me as I read this. This is from John Morgan, and he was Community Development Director, is that correct? Prior to?
And co-city manager.
Co-city manager.
Okay, and co-city manager at one point. This would be back in the 90s, if I remember right. John, you're probably watching, so hey. I write you concerning the resolution to adopt a Keizer Statement of Values, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion on your work session agenda for November 9. I strongly encourage the council to adopt it while including a statement condemning white supremacy, acknowledging it as a threat to our community and society. White supremacy is a pattern of thought and behavior unfortunately embedded in the American story and the story of Keizer. While Chalmers Jones stands as a Black Keizer citizen highly regarded in the 1980s and 1990s, he was a rare figure in the demographics of the city. As an aside, I wrote back and I said, can we please get that information for our points of interest committee so we can do something to better commemorate the story of Mr. Jones. I was not aware of it. And maybe I'm just the only one, but I think it would be important for our community. Back to the email. At the same time, and even now, Keizer's Latino population suffers a history of discrimination. I remember well, while serving as the Community Development Director and Interim City Manager in the 1990s, a rallying cry in the police department. I can't even read this. It's ugly. It is really ugly. I can't read that. It's just too ugly. Let's go beat, and it's a disparaging term toward our Latino community members.
You want me to read it?
If you would,
Okay, I remember the 90s, a rally cry from the police department, let's go beat some beaners. both leadership and toleration of this type of white supremacist ethic was part of the justification for firing Police Chief Chuck Stoll. One of my proudest moments as a public servant of the people of Keizer. It was also a learning moment for me as it exposed both the wrong and damage such white supremacist thinking inflicted on our city. You can finish.
Thank you. Yes, former Chief Stoll was, we were very happy to transition over to Mark Adams as the police chief. He had a lot of healing work to do when he came in as chief and did a magnificent job in that, a legacy that Chief Teague has continued and progressed. Of course, the proposed resolution has no power of law. However, it is a statement from the leaders of our city, both sending a message and setting the direction for our community and for our city government. Acknowledging, condemning, and denouncing white supremacy is not only the right thing to do, putting the statement into action is the right thing to do. Keizer has long been recognized as a great place to raise a family. I know. My 4 sons all went to Gubser, Whitaker, and McNary. But that experience and the values underlying it must not only accrue to those of us with Northern European heritage, but to every family and every citizen within our city. We will be much stronger and achieve more as a community if we can acknowledge the negative impacts of white supremacy and vow to fight them in the future. Pride, spirit, and volunteerism. I believe the resolution with this amendment helps to define and enrich the spirit embodied in our motto. I strongly encourage you to approve the resolution with language acknowledging, condemning, and denouncing white supremacy. Thank you for your time and consideration. John Morgan. So, are there any significant changes, adds that somebody wants to put in here? We got a couple of really good suggestions on, I flagged this one. There were a couple of others, grammatical suggestions, and definitely will have to be gone through. We also got some really good feedback from several folks. Some of them just sent the comments from our last council meeting, so those are in the record and already on air. And then some other ideas in order to continue to add to this resolution. But there was one that had a couple of, here it is, from former Mayor Lori Christopher, had some additions. And I think we kind of captured this on D, where we added the city of Keizer. So what she suggested was adding government and societal policies and practices and laws that have historically resulted in discrimination. And I definitely liked the add of city of Keizer, and we just saw the great example of why. But I think right here that if people want to make that a little broader, we can. But I think right at this point, I'd like to leave that as specifically targeting the policies and practices of government, because that is what we are able to take action on. If you want to add something else, we can add that as a second bullet. So what we can do is go through, and some of the other changes, we can come back and make those in additional work. But as far as the main concepts, I think we've been able to capture a lot of those. What I like to do is hit save, which I just did, and ask if the city council would like to go to our public testimony here from the folks who came tonight. All right. So I have a number of people who have signed up to speak tonight, and I'm going to start with Claire Snyder.
Mayor Clark,
Yes,
before we do that,
I'm sorry.
can
Yes.
I make a statement?
yes. Councilor Kohler.
Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Then you can stop. Hate has no place in our city. When I came on city council, one of my first goals was to eliminate section 44 language from the city charter. I proposed the measure, which ended up forming the Charter Review Committee. I am thankful for the committee and others who invested many months of arduous work into what was eventually submitted to the voters. I also wish to express my appreciation to the electorate of Keizer who voted to remove the harmful language and make positive change possible. If you recall, 2 work sessions ago, each of the department heads went through and presented all the efforts that have been put in place to eliminate any practices that could be actual or perceived bias towards or against any people in Keizer. Our police chief has developed policies and procedures establishing our department into being a leader in preventative policing. We are doing great work in Keizer. We will continue to learn and evolve to ensure that all people of Keizer can fulfill the quest for the best life and liberty in pursuit of happiness. To explain this a little more, I want to be very clear. Hate has no place in our community, in our state, in the United States of America, or in the world. Personally, it's important for me to state all Keizer residents deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and afforded the opportunity to live their best lives. I herewith denounce any group or person that uses aggression, violence, bullying, or intimidation. This has no place in Keizer. No one should be robbed of their freedom because of hateful actions. We must endeavor to eliminate all of those negative behaviors from our city and become an example of hope for our neighboring cities and beyond. Mayor Clark.
Thank you. And I know there were some people who were, noticed that you were not at our last council meeting. You were away for a family commitment, and so you didn't have a chance to share your thoughts as we did at that council meeting. So I appreciate you taking the time at this point.
I do have one other question,
Yes.
and I address this to City Attorney Shannon Johnson. What is viewpoint discrimination, and does any of this make a difference in that perspective?
Viewpoint discrimination in connection with the First Amendment means the government can't suppress one type of speech over another. However, the government, as you folks, are free to have any viewpoint you want. So sometimes that gets mixed up. So, for example, if we allowed different groups to put a message at the focal point or something like that, we couldn't say to one group, you can't put that message there, but it's okay for your message to the other group. But it doesn't prevent you folks in this situation of having any policies that you want. So you're free to have any policies with regard to the issues you're discussing tonight.
All right. All right, thank you very much. I will clarify any policies that we want that are within the bounds of the Constitution.
True.
We do have some limitations. I know, I was feeling pretty powerful there for a moment. I'm like, oh yeah, no. That's not going to happen. All right. With that, Claire Snyder, you're up first, and then, okay. And then Pat Fisher, you'll be on deck. If you could just say your name and your city of residence for the record, so we'll have it on the tape.
Yes. My name is Claire Snyder, and I'm a resident of Keizer. I was born and raised here. I've been here since I was 6 years old, so I consider that born and raised. My children are both students of different schools here in the Keizer area, and I am a very proud Black and Latina woman. I am the founder of Sit in Salem, which is a group that I work with in Salem to encourage education as well as having uncomfortable conversations when it comes to disparities and inequities, when it comes to race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, but primarily race right now. First and foremost, I want to say I came here tonight with a very heavy heart after hearing some of the comments and the concerns that were made. But I want to thank you for taking the time to assert that my life matters as a citizen of Keizer. I want to thank each and every one of you for making yourselves uncomfortable so that I can feel safe, because that is what you are doing. And I'm very emotional because the first time I ever had a gun drawn on me was by Keizer Police Department when I was 16 years old. That was my experience in Keizer. I promptly moved out of Keizer to Salem for a short while to be safe so that I could feel certain that my life would continue. Tonight, you are changing the experience of people of color in Keizer. And I don't know if you know how monumental that is. And I know that there are going to be people that dissent, and I know that this is something that is going to need to be amended and changed and grow, but every government needs that. Every government needs to stand up for the people who are not heard. And there are going to be people who disagree, but you are also allowing me to have a voice so that I can work to understand you better and you can work to understand me better. So I came in here with a very, very different thought of what this conversation was going to look like. And you have changed my mind and my heart and my city. And I want to thank you, and I want to stress that please keep pushing, keep leading, keep taking those steps, and do not be afraid to stand up for the people who are hurting, because you're listening to the voices of people who are hurting. And then when something comes up where one of you is disenfranchised, I will have your back, and I will be able to stand up, and I will be able to use my voice to support you as well. So I just want to give you a huge amount of gratitude for doing this. And I want to let you know that I will be here championing those changes and trying to encourage that as a citizen of Keizer. But also, I really, really would love to see what City Councilor Smith said about some kind of forum or panel where we can discuss diversity and so we can understand each other, because it is going to be really uncomfortable. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be jarring. But by bringing all of us together and putting ourselves together in this, we don't say someone's safety and comfort is above another's. We say that we are in it together to make Keizer an inclusive, beautiful city, because that's what it can be. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share that with you. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy and exhausting days to work on something that's hard and difficult, but it's going to mean the world to people like me. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Pat Fisher.
Well, Madam Mayor and councilors, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I did submit written comments, so you have those already in your packet as well. And I think what you see there is I took some issues with the draft that you've developed so far. But I also do see that it's a work in progress, and I do see that you're all sincerely committed to making this to doing the right thing and making this a good resolution for the city of Keizer. So I encourage you to keep working on that. We have mentioned the timing too, so I don't think you need to rush into this. I think it is good to keep hearing the testimonies and the stories from people. And the timing really, I think, is that I hope you will get this done before the turnover of the council, because you have all invested a lot in this, and it would be that much more difficult if you have to start over with, different people involved. So as I looked at the statement as it existed, one of the main things I think I said was that it seems too dry and too cold in its tone. And I know it is a legal document, but I encourage you to think about writing it as if you are writing it to your neighbors, because really we are, okay? So if you had a new neighbor and we showed them this resolution, would that make them feel welcome, and would that make them feel safe in the community? So far, in its current form, I don't think so. Okay, and I looked at it in, let me back a little bit. Last week you had some very eloquent and passionate testimony, and the young lady over here as well. I can't match any of those, but so you've heard from some of the community. You've heard from some Latinos' experience. You've heard from some Black experience. Maybe you've heard similar stories from gay, lesbian, transgender, or maybe you haven't heard those accounts yet. And other people who are also have a sincere interest in this, that are affected by this, that whose stories, particular stories, may not have been told yet. I think that those of us that have not been in the position of being a minority I can see that you're listening and you're trying to get that sense. I mean, I have been the only white person on a bus going somewhere. I've been the only straight person in a room with dozens or hundreds of gay and lesbian. I've been the only woman among men at work. I've been the only person who could not speak English in everybody else around me was speaking other languages. But all those situations are temporary from me. Some of you have also experienced those as temporary situations, but we're thinking about that for our neighbors that you've been hearing about, that experience that kind of thing every day. And how do we make sure that they really do feel welcome and included in our community? So when I look at the resolution, I've kind of thought of it in three ways: that we have a recognition, and then we have an intention, and then we have some action. So the recognition part of it here is recognizing some laws and recognizing some things, practices that have happened somewhere and sometime that were unfair and cruel and maybe mean to people. But we have not in this document recognized that it's here in Keizer. That Keizer mayor that has the reputation that you spoke of, okay? So it seems like we do need to recognize that these things have happened here and are sometimes still happening here. And that seems to me the most important part of the whereas section. That's why we're doing this, right? And then the intentions section, you've discussed that tonight. How detailed are you going to be with your intentions and commitments? And then I've also wrote in my letter that I think what is missing is some actions. And I know that you can't go to a level of detail that's going to paint you into a legal corner or something, but I think there needs to be some actions there so that the people reading it know that staff is going to do something, council is going to do something, or there's going to be a review board, or there's going to be an event, or there's going to be some type of follow-up, some type of next steps. So I think all three of those parts and what level of detail that you put into those is what you're looking at doing. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Any questions?
So I did want to reiterate that our next work session will be on housing equity as one of those step forwards, and we're looking forward also to our council goal setting. And I would like to acknowledge that council candidates and our councilors-elect are here. They're here in the room, so there will be continuity in that conversation. And not only this current council, but also our councilors-elect will be all part of this work going forward, especially in our council goal setting. So that's where we're going to start to parse out some of the actions. We're also very aware that community events are not going to be occurring in person for a while. So we're going to have to find some creative alternatives to be able to engage with one another in a meaningful way. That's an unfortunate reality. I was on a conference call this afternoon as the governor explained the pause, especially for Marion County. So we're going to have to keep on Zooming for a while. But hang in there, we'll have those community events. But that should not stop us from the community conversations and finding other ways to connect. So thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Matthew Poteet, and then I have someone who just wrote their address and no name. So I don't know who that is, but I'll read off the address if you didn't put your name on. But Mr. Poteet.
Madam Mayor, councilors, Matthew Poteet, I'm a resident here in Keizer. Mr. Williams, thank you very much for your words this evening. All of you discussing these things. I too came with a different thought that things were going to be handled a little bit differently tonight. One of the main reasons for that is the recent charter vote. You know, there was still 37% of Keizer that voted against it. So that, you know, kind of made me put on my granddaddy trousers, and, you know, I am a grandpa. And so, you know, a lot of changes. I want to read something here. The boys down at the Capitol yesterday understood very clearly that they were not welcome. I wrote this yesterday. The rallies that took place on Saturday, one at the Capitol, the other one down on Church Street. What would have happened if I had stepped in between an aggressively racist man with an AR-15 and a group of teenagers? I thought about it as the boys turned and walked away. But this thought stuck with me all evening. A full-grown man with a locked and loaded firearm was yelling racial slurs at a group of teenagers in front of the state capitol with police and bystanders everywhere. Nobody did anything, not even me. I scanned the area as it was happening, and that little moment I witnessed had not disrupted anything going on. I was the only person seeing it. Probably 15 to 20 people standing around. Nobody flinched, looked up, or batted an eye. Some of them were much closer than me. What would you have done? The question isn't whether or not white supremacy exists. The question is, what will you, our community leaders, as a predominantly white council, do about it to call it out by name, denounce it, and work to eliminate it? I watched 4 teenagers this weekend be harassed by an armed Proud Boy wearing his black and yellow colors with Proud Boy on his back in front of the state capitol. They were standing in a small huddle, minding their business, literally not engaging with anyone, just each other. The Proud Boy broke ranks, walked up to them, and started yelling racial slurs, telling them to go home, to Mexico. That moment has haunted me since it happened. The young men walked away quickly, but my first thought was to put myself in between them and the psychopath with a gun. I would do that with my children. You would do that with yours, right? Isn't this what we're supposed to do? Put ourselves in between children and danger. Aren't we here to protect the children? What powerful statement are we going to make when it comes to the safety of our children? Will we tell them we did all we could, that we created a value statement and suddenly made all the danger disappear? Are we really happy and content with a beautiful statement that promotes inclusion, similar to every other inclusion state ever written, when it doesn't even broach the subject of racial hate? Or are we serious and ready to put ourselves in between danger and our children? I am not Antifa. I am not radical. I am not an activist. I go to work and I pay my taxes. I support Black Lives Matter because they do. I know that murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls is real. I support equality and justice for all genders, races, cultures, and ethnicities. I support honored treaties. One person tonight mentioned a group of people that lived here historically for thousands of years, and they're never mentioned. CNN mentioned them the other day on the news. They called them something else. So, moving forward, if I witness anything like this again, I give you my word as a citizen and a grandfather, a father, I will put myself in between. I am here to protect my children and yours. Are you here to protect mine? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate you also bringing up our First Nations. We have the leader, the chair of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz lives here in Keizer. And if we're going to have a conversation about our First Nations, or the Confederated Tribes of Siletz and Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, that would be a separate issue because we want to honor them as as tribal governments and have those conversations about how we can continue to grow relationships. That said, we have had good working relationships with our Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and Siletz, and I'm very happy that we've been able to have good conversations, good community together, and also with the Shamawa Indian School, I was reminded that one of the representatives for it was the Shamawa Interchange Area Management Plan, Sue Ann Reddick, represented the school and the tribal nations on that particular project, since it was impacting the properties there, and I had not connected the dots as to who she is. Councillor Smith?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Sue Ann Reddick is my mother, and she's actually done, she was the historian behind the Shamawa Indian School, the stuff that's with the Oregon Historical Society. So I've grown up around it. I remember when she started it, I was like 10, 11 years old. She still has a lot of the documentation. I've read a lot of the stories. I know a lot about the land in Keizer. I know how it was removed. I know how the federal government handled things. Just from being around that and growing up around that. I also have a 28-year-old daughter, Samantha, who is her biological father's Grand Ronde Tribal, so she's a registered tribal member. So it is near and dear to my heart, and I do hear you when you speak, Mr. Petit. So thank you for acknowledging that group, because you are right. They are many times left off the radar when we have these discussions, but I give you my word that that will not be continuing as we go forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. 461, yes, pardon?
Oh, ask my question. That's fine.
Okay, I've got one more person. 4615 Shoreline. Carol, name? I thought I recognized the address, but I wasn't going to assume.
You should have recognized that.
I know, I should,
Walk
but
by there all the time.
I know, but it's just
So
Carol's
silly.
house.
I think we're all
It's like
tired.
our phone numbers, like I don't know.
So good evening, Madam Mayor, councilors, staff. I had a prepared statement, but as I listened to what Mr. Williams had to say, I changed it. And this just sort of kind of grabbed me. 1% of the people, 1% of the people are trying to educate.
A little closer to the microphone.
Are trying to educate 99% of the people, of which 37% of our Keizer residents who voted in this last election do not want to be educated. Somehow, we must find a way to bridge this gap. Somehow, we have got to bridge this gap.
All right,
Thank you for the work you're doing.
thank you. I will point out with the charter, there were many changes in the charter, so there would be a number of reasons for people to vote no. I can't think of a good one right now, but I do want to be fair in that that was only one change among many that were in the charter, and if somebody objected to any of the changes, that would be cause for no vote. So while I appreciate that there were people who did vote no, I would be very reluctant to assign reason without asking each one why they voted no, and I haven't had those conversations. But I would be interested in talking to people to find out why they voted no. So just to put that out there. Okay? Councilor Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've talked to quite a few people that called me and said, we're just going to vote no just because we probably shouldn't change anything we don't have to. And so I was able to have a conversation with them and help them understand why we should vote yes for this. But I think there's a lot of people that get their ballot and they just go, oh, a change? I don't think we need to make a change, and just do it. So to say that there's 37% of the people that don't agree with making any change, I don't think is very accurate.
And I would concur. There were some people called me up because they didn't take the time to do the diligent work. I personally think that each of us, it's an important thing to do to be very informed about our voting, but we know that that isn't always the case. So I think it's important to be, to understand that we have opportunity to do outreach. Councilor Smith, then I'm going to go Council President Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Carol, I saw those numbers too. I was watching them very, very carefully, and I kind of was in my head, because I like getting 100% on any challenge. I was like kind of upset about it myself. But I also remember years ago when I first started voting, my dad used to tell me, he was old school, and he just said, if you don't understand it, you just vote no. Keeps you safe. And that is a thought process we probably need to work on. The other thing is with COVID, it did really make this difficult to get that message out. Our only real means were either standing on a street with a sign or trying to promote it on Facebook. And I can tell you the analytics on the Facebook page were not nearly as high as we wanted them to be. And I think there was just a lot of other white noise going on. But I also think that it remains a challenge for us to still do that work that we committed to on the Charter Review Committee, to get out there and to have those conversations still. So, but I did see that too, and I felt the same way, so thank you.
I promised Council President Freeman, and then I'll come to you, Councilor Herrera.
Thank you, Thank you, Madam Mayor. We had that same vote no conversation at my house, and agree that if people don't really know, they're just more comfortable voting no. I'll echo Councilor Smith, and I know Pat Fisher was also on the Charter Review Committee, and we really wanted to do a lot more outreach, and then COVID happened. You've heard us say that a million times, and getting outside of these four walls, which made our city attorney a little nervous, but we never did get outside, as he's laughing under that mask, just in case you didn't know. So I think it's still a goal of this council to get outside of these four walls, as beautiful as they are, but we need to get out into the community that we serve. I just wanted to actually kind of address Mr. Potteet's comments just about our sovereign nation, and I would really I know there's conversations that want to be had, but I would really like to add something with our sovereign nation in this statement that we have, because when we are talking a lot about equity, racial justice work, a lot of times they are the forgotten people, and there is a lot of times in some of the work that we're doing in our agency, we actually stop before we ever have a meeting, and we bless the ground that we're in this room and the ground that we're on because of our sovereign nation families. And so I just think that is, an area where you talk about communities of color or the Black, Indigenous people of color, which is BIPOC, which you see a lot of those words. But then you also see the addition of the sovereign nation. And so I would really just like to have either some thought around that, just to make sure that, again, we are including all people of Keizer. And I think it sends the conversation outside of the city of Keizer as well. So thank you, Matthew.
So just so I can put a note in here so we can work on that section, is it part of kind of the background? We recognize or we want to honor the First Nations as a background or as a conclusion? Or both? Or do you want to think about it? I'm going to put a note in here and then we can.
I think it's a good conversation, either the background, both. My grandma actually was one of the secretaries at the Shemao Indian School in what I would consider the old building, and I guess you'd have to be old enough to know what the old building is. So luckily I cover my gray, so I can't be like the mayor, so you really don't know how old I am, right? But I do remember, playing in that building and, all of the great history that was in that, what I, again, consider the old building. So I'm open to, thoughts from the council if it's in both places, but I just think it's something that we do need to call out. So thank you.
something about the lands, and then I'm going to have to think about this unless you've got a great phrase to go in, sorry. Put something here connecting with, okay.
And Madam Mayor, I guess for me too is, what words describe them? I mean, we've heard tribal government. In my agency, we refer to them as sovereign nations. You've got First Nations. So I guess,
We'll go definitions again.
So I guess it's, I'm
I don't know.
not saying there's one right or wrong, but, maybe that's a conversation too. What really is the proper recognition? And so just thoughts around that too.
Just as an input, all concepts or terms are incorrect. Okay, coming from a
If you're going to have to come up the microphone, because the people who are listening need to be able to hear what you're saying.
So coming from a European approach, all of those concepts are actually incorrect. They are those are European concepts, European terms. When you get into actual tribal government, so First Nations is actually more derivative of Canada.
Okay.
Here in Oregon, we have the 9 federally recognized tribes. Each has their own distinction, their own tribal sovereign government. And then within those confederated tribes, confederated means conglomeration, so there's multiple tribes in there. So, looking for correct terminology, I would approach the tribes and ask them how they want to be included in this.
And I was just about to thank you. And I've heard under her breath, Councilor Smith going, I'm going to ask my mom. Which I think is a very wise move to get the, so I'm making it here. Okay, something to that effect. I don't have the right words here, but it's getting the concept in there. Are we good? Okay. So, friends, ask mom. Okay. Councilor Herrera.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In regards to the Measure 24-453, I remember vividly the original, but more people voted no to keeping that on than they actually voted back then to pass it. And for 6,000 people to vote no accidentally, I know Keizer better than that. And I think it would be wise to talk to folks of BIPOC folks or LGBTQ folks, see what their positions are, because I know some folks that voted no exactly why, because they didn't want, I know, but I think it's, we have to face the reality of where we're at, where Keizer is. I'm just judging it by the rest of the election. 6,000, it didn't surprise me. I was thinking maybe I was hoping for maybe 10%, but 35% is way too many, and I don't agree that it was a large percentage of folks that didn't know what they were doing. I really don't, just from my own experiences. But I will say this, that I'm glad that it passed, whether it was barely or 66%. I have it right here in front of me. 11,000 votes to 6,000 votes. But I wasn't surprised. But I just wanted to let what I thought, because I'm sure there'd be some percentage that didn't know, because it was well known what it was about. I know I worked hard. I had signs made. I paid for myself. I worked hard on that particular, of all of us here. I think I have the furthest history with that. And I brought it up from day one. I talked to our city attorney many years ago about this. And I just was kind of disappointed that Keizer's still not there yet. And I'm judging it by the whole election, not just by that. But 6,000 people, that's a lot of people to vote accidentally or whatever. But I think it's we have work to do, and like Benny says, we never give up. So keep working at it. I kind of felt like I did at the last election, but hopefully it won't take 28 years to get it back to where we should be. But it's the reality of Keizer, and I just want us to keep working towards the goal of inclusion. But I just wanted to bring that up because the first thing you hear is, well, they didn't mean to or whatever, it was an accident or whatever. But I happen to know that folks, there were a good group of folks that would love to keep that on there. So that's it's a reality. So thank you very much.
And I wouldn't dispute that for some people that definitely was a reality, but I've also be interested to talk to other people why they voted no. I was told years ago that if you pass something 65-35, that's a huge win. It's just the tendency to I'm not going to spend the time on it. I'm just plain going to vote no. Is when you get above that 65%, you've really rocked it. So this was just traditionally in terms of ballot measures, and it was somebody who was very active in political realms and elections and so forth. That was just that person's experience with how elections and how people tend to vote. So I'm not saying that I know how people voted and why, but I would say that there's going to be an element that wanted to keep things the way they were. There was going to be an element of people who just said, I don't know, I'm just going to vote no because I'm too busy, and it's going to be everything in between. So I think it's an opportunity for us to continue our conversations and continue to broaden the folks that we work with and visit with about what's important to Keizer. We were definitely hampered by not being able to get together and do some of the other things that we normally would do around an election.
And a lot of ballot measures have nothing to do, excuse me, I'm sorry. A lot of ballot measures have nothing to do with people's lives. They're like things that are other things other than people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a big difference, folks' lives.
And I would agree. Yeah, I would agree.
Thank you.
All right. I think we've done some good work tonight. I think we've got some, I'm going to ask, that was all the people who signed up for public testimony. Was there anybody else who wanted to speak tonight? I know it's past 8, but come on down.
6,000.
Michelle Roland Schwartz. No boot.
I know, no boot. And I know that you're tired. I know we're all tired, so I appreciate you taking my testimony. So Michelle Roland Schwartz, I'm a resident of Keizer, and many of you know that I'm the director of a statewide nonprofit based here in Keizer, the Oregon Sexual Assault Task Force. And I just want to share that I appreciate the conversation this evening. I feel like I came prepared for a different conversation, and I feel like this was really mature, and I appreciate everything that you all have shared and said. And I just want to add that in my work over the last several decades of doing sexual and domestic violence work, and that includes child abuse and human trafficking and all of those, stalking, all of those things, that one of the things that we're looking at doing is preventing it from happening in the first place. And this city taking bold leadership and denouncing white supremacy helps crack that open. And it offers us an opportunity to heal communities. And I believe that very deeply, particularly thinking about conversations that I've had with many of our Native and Indigenous community members across the state about, it's not a matter of if I experience sexual or domestic violence, it's a matter of when. And that is deeply connected to manifest destiny, stolen land, and white supremacy. That is all tied together, and that's true across the board when we look at all forms of abuse, violence, harassment, and discrimination. I was reflecting over the weekend, and I want to just read something that really spoke to me this weekend as I was thinking about coming to council tonight, and just thinking about, particularly after the election, like, how do I show up in this community and continue to contribute and think about us and our collective kind of power and movement towards healing. I liked the language that Councilor Marie shared, like this is a progression. And so one of the things that I was reading about was specifically around liberation. You had in one of the slides from a previous work session, if you recall the baseball game and looking at equality and equity, and the different boxes to help with equity, but the concept of liberation, of just like knocking that fence down completely so that everybody can enjoy the game, right? And so one of the things that I was reading over the weekend was around liberation and this idea of us working together collectively as friends, moving towards freedom. So friend and free in English come from the same root, which conveys the idea of a shared power that grows. Being free and having ties is one and the same thing. I am free because I have ties, because I am linked to a reality greater than me. I've had to sit as a white woman with a lot of privilege in my work and think about the ways in which that I have been called out in my work, doing anti-violence work and being a part of a movement that has historically centered particularly white women survivors' experiences. And one of the things that I just want to share and convey is the need for us to kind of own those moments in which we make mistakes, and that we all do. I have, and I know that I will continue to do. But this idea of it being linked to a reality greater than me is that it's not about me, it's about all of us, and that my getting it and understanding it is directly tied to other people's liberation. So that's all I have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good note to conclude upon, don't you? I would like to thank everybody for coming, for sharing, the people who sent their comments. Counselors, thank you for your thoughtful work that has gone into this conversation. City staff, city manager, thank you for your intentional hard work on behalf of all the people of Keizer. Mr. Williams, Benny Williams, thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your experiences and your wisdom, and we're looking forward to continuing to build bridges, build relationships, and community.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Councilor Kohler?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple things that I've thought about for the last couple of weeks, and one of those is that love and understanding is the way that hearts and minds are changed, not by a set of words and platitudes. So I guess what I want to reiterate is John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you. That ye also love one another. By this shall all men know ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. And that's really what we're talking about, is being able to love one another. All the words and all the other things that go along with that are the challenge. So I've had people come to me and say, oh, well, this is the way you feel about this, therefore you're racist and you're this and you're that. And I get really tired of that. They don't know my mind. They don't know my heart. I want to love one another.
All right. Love one another. All right. With that, the time is 8:18. We are adjourned.